Oh my gosh. Sorry, guys. I'm sorry, guys. Happy Sunday. Happy Sunday. This is Karen here, your favorite virtual assistant. And every Sunday we have Gail with me every Sunday when she's going to introduce herself. But today we have an amazing guest, and I am so excited about the conversation today. So,
Hey,
okay, Gail.
good afternoon, everybody. As you know, my name is Gail Withers. By day, I'm a corporate training facilitator. I help managers empower their teams with unique training programs. But in my other life, I, along with Karen, we host these very important conversations on topics that we all need to know more about. And today, we are talking about how to ace those very difficult conversations with teens and young adults. And I don't want to say that they're all difficult, but we've invited Leah Zimmerman, who is going to introduce herself. Welcome, Leah. Thanks for joining us
Yes.
today.
Thank
And
you, Leah.
Leah, it's going to, by the end of this conversation, we're going to have those difficult conversations covered. We're going to be having lots of quiet, peaceful, Zen type chats with our teens and our young adults. And welcome, Leah. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in this very unique kind of area?
Sure. So it's about 5 years now, a little bit, depending how you count, that I've been working in my own business as a coach. I call the business stepping stool coaching. Actually, in fact, based on that, when we're children, we need that step stool to reach the sink. And I was thinking about what it is that coaching does. I think it really is providing a step stool for other people to do their own stepping up. You're just giving the stool. Or as another client described it, spotting people with a heavy lift,
Mm,
Oh,
being the
hmm.
spotter
Yeah,
people do,
yeah.
while someone does the lifting.
I like
And,
that.
and that's kind of how I came into doing the coaching. I was as a child. My parents would say I'd argue with them because I thought they were unfair. And
mm,
they would just tell me, well, go to your room, cry into your pillow, and when you're a grown up, you can do it your way. And that idea that I could do it my way when I grew up was brilliant because I started taking notes about what my way would be. And I was
Mm,
mm,
already watching teachers in the classroom and thinking, there's something not right here. There's something about the way teachers are behaving with the children. And I had some teachers who really, more than others, that could be very challenging with children. And I thought, they're not helping the children. There was something I could see in the child that needed support, but the teacher was only taking out their frustration or
mm,
trying to control. And I saw my parents do the same thing with my younger brother as they tried to change his behavior. They were all carrot and sticks and punishment or
mm,
incentives. But I could tell, and I didn't have a language for it then because I was quite young, that there was something else going on. And so then I went into education because I wanted to be that adult that had somehow seemed missing for me.
mm-hmm.
And in doing that, I was able to find, how do you become a compassionate leader who also still creates a high bar and asks people to raise it? How do I have high expectations and help my students reach it? But it's that second part that I didn't know how to do and knew was missing. How do you help them reach that high expectation and support them as they get there? And how to do that with rigor while being kind and compassionate was not intuitive and was definitely a journey. And then I have a whole theatrical background, which also helped me take a look at communication, and the particular training that I went through in and out of 10 years really helped me look at humans and what gets in the way of our communication. Because you watch actors get up to do a scene and you see all the ways that they try to protect themselves from
mhm,
being emotionally exposed. Yet it is when we're emotionally exposed that we're so powerful as communicators. And so all those kinds of things kind of led me. And then I had my own leadership journey as I started leading educational programs and working with adults and parents and various kinds of stakeholders and all kinds of difficult conversations and
Mm,
intergenerational conversations. And at some point, I made the decision that I realized people weren't always going to agree with me. And there might be a time where they get upset with me because I was the obstacle in their way, or I need to become the scapegoat for problems. And what I needed to be able to do was stand in my own integrity of the decisions that I had made and how I had behaved in those moments. And when I started taking responsibility for how I showed up every moment and practicing the mindfulness and the personal growth that required, I felt a different kind of alignment. And then when people threw shit at me because
mm,
of their issues, I had a
mhm.
shit screen
Yeah,
because
yeah.
now, oh, I got it. You're throwing, that's yours. Okay,
mm-hmm.
It's uncomfortable. Do I
Mm,
want to be on the receiving end of that? No. But does that mean that I did something wrong? No, because the only thing that really ever hurts in a difficult conversation when somebody says something about you is when you believe it. And when I could know that I didn't believe
mhm.
it anymore, or that I had a different interpretation and stand in that, I kind of became somewhat immune to a lot of that other kind of thrusting negativity at me. That's not to say I didn't have feelings about it, but I could become
Right.
aware of my reactions without thinking and know that they were my minefields and not that there was truth to what the other person was sending at me. So I'd say that's sort of the trajectory. And then I have a 15-year-old. So I have a
Right.
20-year-old and a 15-year-old, and living in the world of teens. Each has challenged that in slightly different ways. But it's a
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
passion of mine to think about how we parent, and that parenting is a form of leadership, and how we lead our families and how we lead our children already sets the tone of the kind of leadership skills our children will have and how they will lead themselves in their own lives. And that we think of parenting too much as trying to help our children get to a certain goal line instead of how we actually, in the day to day, teach them how to be someone in the process of leading their own lives and trusting themselves and making decisions. And then it's much harder to do the latter, but it's actually more rewarding too.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, that's great, Leah. I mean, as far as when your own work, what you have learned, and as a young kid, how you realize that, right? Because I know as a young kid, I didn't realize nothing. When you're a kid, you don't realize something. You figure that's what it is, and that's what your parent is telling
Yeah.
you. So you have to do
Have to do
what
it. I
right. You just
agree.
have to do
And you
it.
Yeah.
didn't have a say.
Right.
Your conversations with your parent tended to be one way.
Right.
They talked, you listened,
Listen. Yeah.
and as you said, you go to your room in frustration and you say they're unfair and they don't understand what I'm saying, and you just bottle all these feelings in your room, feeling that there's no out. There's nowhere you can get. There's no out. So I
Right.
had a question for you. What kinds of difficult conversations, like if you had to categorize types of difficult conversations, although I want you to give us some examples, but I also want to frame that question in sometimes you start a very innocent, calm conversation with a teen or a young adult, and somehow it just, the trajectory just changes. And then you end up hearing something, I hate you, I hate you, I don't want to. Like,
Right.
can you help me, like help me, Leah,
Yeah.
what's going on there? Like, so what kind of
Okay.
conversations would you determine might be
Well,
difficult, and then we'll
I
go
think what you're
into
really
how do you think.
asking is what makes that wrong turn. I mean, I think what makes something difficult conversation. I was trying to think about that question, and I'm often talking about the difference between discerning between difficult people and difficult conversations.
Hmm.
Very few
Mm,
people are actually difficult people, but a lot
Hmm.
of the people who we find difficult is because they challenge us. So where
That's
with
true.
there's any kind of resistance in the conversation, it starts to become difficult. There's a resistance to getting what we want, to being able to express ourselves freely. And there's always something we want from the other person. We want the
Hmm.
validation. We want, aha, you're right. Good idea. We want something that feels heard.
yeah.
We want to be seen, heard, validated, valued. And when we're not getting that, it feels like a difficult conversation. When we feel emotionally exposed, like I'm sharing, I love you can be a very difficult conversation. I
Right.
want to invite somebody on a date for the first time is a difficult conversation. I want to share with you why this matters, or I actually don't know the answer, so I feel a little exposed here. Um, those are difficult conversations. I think those are the main ingredients for difficult conversations. And then I think when stress is involved, it can sabotage difficult conversations. And then the most obvious is actually when there are linguistic difficulties. It's hard to have a conversation because we're not understanding each other. And I bring that up not because it's really the kind of conversation we want to talk about, but because it's obvious to us. We're not understanding each
Hmm.
other. I can't hear your words. I can't decipher you. Maybe I don't have hearing. Maybe I don't have the same language. Maybe we come from different accents. There can be different things that get in the way. But the thing is, in that situation, it's obvious to us that there's a linguistic thing in the way.
Right.
The thing that's not obvious to us is when the linguistic things that are in the way are under the surface. They're not syntactical or grammatical, but there's still linguistic things about how we socially express ourselves. And they're also other kinds of social dynamics that are going on in the way we talk to each other that we're unaware of often. An example I like to give is I'm from New York. I'm fairly direct in what I say, in my style of speaking and in my sentences. I like to
Me
interrupt
too. That's why I'm
others.
laughing. Because I'm from New
I
York
have a
too.
whole paragraph that I wrote about the day I really
Mhm.
learned to understand Californian, where I live now.
Okay.
Um, when I first moved to Texas in the 90s and I was in my 20s, I remember feeling that I had to learn how to end my own sentences, and this was a whole different thing.
Wow.
And other people just smiling, listening. They're just listening. And I don't know what to do with that. I'm just gonna keep going because the moment I stop and there's a silence, I feel completely naked. Because
Mhm.
that's just not where I'm from. Watch The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and you'll
Yeah.
like that's where I'm from. That's how we talk in my family.
Yeah.
So that was hard. So there are things like that that are going on often that we're not that aware of. There's things between men and women that are aware of, and there's things between children and adults. In the conversation, there's often Deborah Tannen writes about this, which is sociolinguistic, the sense that somebody's one up and somebody's one down in the conversation.
Mm.
And that
Mm.
status is often what's we're vying for in our conversations, especially with our teens. So that's a
Mhm.
different kind of level of linguistic thing that's going on, but that's a form of resistance. So I would put that still in the category that there's something going on in the conversation that feels like resistance. We're becoming emotionally uncomfortable, or there's something that's in the way of getting what we want, which may be that feeling of status, but we're not always so aware or tuned to what it is we actually want in the conversation. And so we're really
Mhm.
not that good at just asking for what we want. Rarely do we
Yeah.
say to our child, look, I'm really scared that if you stay out that late with kids I don't know in a place that I don't know,
Hmm.
I won't be able to protect you. And that is the most fearful thing in my life. And to
Right.
show this to our child is really hard. It's much easier to say, no, what do you think? You can't stay up that late.
Right.
I said you're home at 11, you're home at 11.
Right.
That's easier.
Right.
It's not effective, but it's easier
Yeah.
than
It really
saying,
is, Leah. It is definitely easier, having
Yeah.
done that myself several
Yeah.
times.
right? I'm the parent. I'm telling you that the parameters because there's an assumption of status, there's an assumption of control, and there's an assumption of and that is how parents have behaved for many, 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 many years.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
That's the
fairly
example
new,
we've been given.
right? And
Yeah.
it's fairly new for us to start to look at our children and want to respect them as individual human beings. And
Mhm.
they're demanding it. Like they're not as patient with us as
No,
we
they're
may have
not.
been. But it's the same happening in changes in leadership. We're not accepting command and control styles of leadership at work. And
Yes.
our children are not accepting command and control styles of leadership at home as easily.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's a different style of leadership that we're evolving to, and that's starting to become more necessary.
Mhm.
Yeah. I find it interesting that you mentioned that because I noticed that a lot of kids, even young kids, not even before they teens, they're actually more expressive, right? In calling out their parents in certain behaviors. And I find
Yeah.
that parents, they have a hard time accepting the being called out. Like they get like even from this gentleman, I don't know who he is, this gentleman on TikTok, somebody asked, what is one thing that you would change from what you was taught? And he was referencing to allow his kid to be able to speak or dialogue or debate if he says something that he don't
Mhm.
like. And for me, right, because the way I grew up, we didn't allow to debate. It wasn't no debate. It wasn't easy. You do what your parent tells you to
That's
do,
right.
and that's what it is, and that's the end of the story. But
So their
kids now, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I mean, you're giving great things, and there's so much already in what you said. Because embedded in there is one, we think being a good parent is getting our kids to do what we're supposed to do. That makes us feel like we're being a good parent. That makes us feel
Mhm.
in control. That makes us feel like
Right,
we're on the right track. So there are a lot of
right,
ways in which we're looking like the dopamine hit is going to come from doing what we think a parent is supposed to do. So we
right,
don't have a model for anything different that's in there. But the other thing you're
right,
saying is about giving the kid a voice, giving them a
right,
chance to say things. And
right.
the challenge of that is we have not had a model or an experience of how to allow ourselves to feel challenged at that level. We
Mhm.
Yeah,
don't like bosses who
definitely.
criticize us. So how we respond to what our kids say to us also has something to do with how we respond to criticism in general in our lives. How
Mm-hmm.
willing are we to receive that somebody's criticism of us is their experience,
Mhm.
might be good information, and
Right,
is something we can get curious about, as opposed to immediately feeling that It's an ego and takes us down. And I'll be honest, this is the thing that can get to me with my teens.
Right.
There'll be a time where they'll talk to me because I'm mom, so they can take their aggravation out. They can say,
Right.
"Mom, stop talking about that." And when they do that, I there's that child inside me that wants to react and feels that shrinks and feels small and invisible.
Right.
And I have to remember, and there are times where it's fine and intuitive because it's nothing about me, but there are times where it somehow triggers what
Mm-hmm.
that reaction I have, and I call those things emotional landmines from
Mm-hmm.
the past, they're ready to
Right.
explode, that being silenced again. For
Right.
me, you feel like, "Oh, I'm being silenced again."
Yeah.
And I have to remember this is my teen's stress behavior.
Right.
And one of the big things we have in our society is we talk about misbehavior in children, which is another responsibility we carry as adults that I think also speaks to what you're saying. Is we
Yes.
feel responsible for how our children behave in the world, and they have to be on good behavior, and their good behavior is a reflection of us as parents.
That's a good
Mm-hmm.
point.
So we
It
feel
is.
we have to make them behave well. But what
Mm-hmm.
we miss is that when we misbehave, it's because 'cause we're stressed. When the people we
Right.
love, when we know misbehave, it's because 'cause they're stressed. When children misbehave, it's a stress behavior and it's communication.
Right.
And if we look at it as a stress behavior as opposed to a misbehavior, we can address it in a whole other way. N
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely went through this, and I could keep talking about it forever, either from watching tell you about stories about children I've worked with or my own children. 'Cause I had a daughter who had a lot of stress behavior when she was young, and some of the friends would say, "Why don't you just show her," whatever. And those
Yeah.
same friends now, 10 years later, see how well teaching her to self-regulate has paid off, even though it was uncomfortable in those moments to do things different from what people expected. She self-regulates really beautifully, and all those other parents encountered places where they couldn't just get their kids to do things. They had docile 5-year-olds, but at
Right.
some point, those kids still spoke up, and
Yeah,
they
because
they
it's a process. It's a process,
Yeah, it
Leah.
is.
But I wanted to raise something from a comment that you made, and I think a lot of how we evolve into adults kind of like is governed by our conversations and our discussions when we are children.
Right,
But what about the situation which I've been in as a child where something happens and a situation blows up and your parent is all over the place, they're having this meltdown and they say, "What do you have to say for yourself? Do you have anything else to say?" And what do we say? Of course we have nothing to say because this situation is so explosive. But my point I guess I'm trying to make is that that's not really how you encourage a child or a teen or a young adult to share their opinion on the situation. You're like, that's so
no,
confrontational. Like,
that's not
what do
you're
you
not
have to say
really
for yourself?
inviting an
You're
opinion,
not.
no,
No.
No,
that's right.
you're not. And
You
and
are
after that
actually
happens a lot or significantly in your life, then it tends to translate into when something like that happens when you're an adult. You don't say anything. You don't even try to
right,
represent yourself, give your case, because you
Mm-hmm.
could have even had a very good reason for whatever happened. But because we've
yeah,
never been, encouraged to share comfortably and honestly, especially in those explosive situations, then we tend to shut down, as I guess, like what you said in the beginning. Well,
that's
you go
right,
to your room and you figured it out. You cry and you do it, but this is how it is. So
right.
it's really hard to unlearn that. I find we learn a lot of things growing up, and then we become adults, and then you have to try to unlearn them.
Yeah.
What you're speaking to is really important. We have generational ways of talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
part of how I was able to unravel things for myself was because I had the incredible blessing of being in a close intergenerational family and spent years living with and next door to my grandmother.
Mm.
And I listened to how she spoke. I got to know her very well. I got to hear stories about my father as a child, and it made everything make so much sense. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
it just all you could see the humanness in what was going on. And a great example is one that I talk about sometimes is my family is very musically inclined. And in my ambitions to be singer, I had and be loud or belt, I pushed and I had some production issues that created off sounds. And my
Mm.
grandmother would drill me on my musicianship and made me feel like I just was never good enough. But then one day she told me the story about how her father, who also had his experiences, which I also know some stories about, would sing with her and her sisters, she had two, after dinner, and then would tell her, Blanche, stop singing, would sing with the other two and reward them with lollipops for doing a good job.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, but my grandmother learned to sing, and she put her mind to it, and she became really good at sight singing, and she loved music and was very musically inclined. But to her, her sisters were always the talented ones. They
Mm.
became music teachers. And the interesting thing was years later to hear one of her sister's daughter-in-law, the cousin-in-law, say how her mother-in-law would say her sister's the Phi Beta Kappa. The other
Mm.
her sister was a smart sister.
Mm.
Mhm.
See?
Yeah.
So but this is an example of how the standards, what my grandmother internalized was a
Mhm.
fear that I would fail an experience which she had experienced, the
Right.
embarrassment or the humiliation. So she was trying to give me the tools because she knew how beneficial they were, and because she enjoyed having persevered and learned them. But what I internalized was, I'm not good enough. I can't do this. No one believes in me. And it was
Mm.
something I desperately wanted to learn how to do. And overcoming that is sort of as an important theme in my life. But that she gave to me because of her fear. And in fact, my grandmother gave a lot of worry. She had a lot of worry and a lot of fear
Mm.
that she gave to the next generation. And then you have to look at it and go, okay, am I going to inhabit that?
That's
Mm.
Am I
that's
getting
Mhm.
this?
wow. That's important.
Yeah,
That's
that's
big thing
powerful.
because I think, yeah, because I think that do happens as a parent or
Mhm.
as a, if you have a grandmother, they inherit those fears from their own experiences, and they
That's right.
they subconsciously bring those down to you, right? Without even realize that
Mhm.
that's what they're doing to you, and then you
Yeah.
carry
So
those,
key
and
thing,
you.
first thing, and the key thing in those difficult conversations is to start to recognize what's at stake for you. Where does this discomfort that you have come from?
Hmm.
And when you said something like the things we say is language we learned. We think we're
Yeah.
creating our own expression in the moment, but so much of our language is really socially learned
Hmm.
bits of communication that come out a certain way. And we've learned them from somewhere. And often when we can't say something different, it's because we've never had the model for it. We don't know those sentences.
Mhm.
We don't know, or
Mhm.
I'd
Right.
call them the conversation moves that are underneath the language. We don't know those conversation moves.
Right.
What we know is how to say, because I said so.
Right.
Because I said so.
Correct.
Because I said
We
so.
we all know
And
that one, Leah, because
Right.
I
We
right?
said
all,
so.
yeah,
We know
we all
that
know
one
that.
because we've learned it. And when we get to that moment of feeling a certain way, that's what you say.
Yeah.
And we
Mhm.
don't know how to decipher the moment of what's underneath the thing, what prompts us to say, because I said so, is that we've hit a dead end in the conversation. We don't know how to express ourselves because we think
Mhm.
we have the overview. We have fear for our children. We have protection. We want
Hmm.
things to be a certain way. We don't want to have to argue anymore. We just want it to go, please. And we don't have to say any of that. What we know how to say is because I said so.
Just up. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's that's
Mhm.
that's a good one.
Mhm.
And I was just telling Gail, right? Because I know when I was growing up, reading like privacy was something that I was in. Privacy. You young, you living under my roof. Privacy is no. But now I'm starting to realize that privacy for children is up and coming. How important it is for kids to have privacy. And I was telling Gail, how do you know, right, as a parent, when it's too much privacy for your kid? Because sometimes you might see maybe some behaviors in your kid that might be
Mhm.
concerning to you. And how do you, if you have a child that does not speak up or doesn't speak to you for whatever reason,
Mhm.
how
But
do
they
you
speak to their
know?
friends. But they
Right.
speak to
Like,
their friends. So we were trying
mhm,
to figure out. So you speak
how,
to your parent and you have one type of conversation, which may be very closely. I don't want to say monitored, but you're very careful what you say to your parent, how you say it, what, and then with your friends, you're freer, you're more comfortable. You talk about any and everything. So I guess what Karen is trying to say, like, how much privacy
privacy
do
is
you?
privacy.
I think it depends. There are a number of different things coming up within the things that you're saying. So there's privacy as in they need their own space physically, and there's privacy as in they've just told you something. So I have a daughter who had a major medical experience this summer,
Hmm.
and because she's requested privacy, it's not something I can talk about or with my friends,
Mhm.
other than to say that there's something we've experienced as a family like that. But
Mhm.
I
That's a
don't
good
talk
point.
about any of that. But she's 20, and there actually HIPAA laws would require the doctors not to be able to talk about her. So she's requested that. So part of it is also they know what privacy they need from us, and they'll tell
Yeah.
us. And that was a real issue for me. I remember when I got my period, I asked my parents not to tell anyone because for me
Mhm.
it felt super private and something that was like you don't talk
Yeah.
about. And I
Mhm.
answered the
Mhm.
phone one day, and my mom's best friend said, "Leah, I hear you're a woman." Right? So right here's a
Wow.
and I was completely
Oh
mortified.
Yeah.
no.
And I couldn't
Yeah.
and it made me feel like I couldn't trust my parents. And my
Mhm.
parents had a way of wanting to show that if I told them one thing and I asked my mom to just not talk to dad about it, my dad was going to talk to me about it the next day to prove that they had did not keep secrets from each other.
Conversation. Yeah.
So I
Wow.
I'd say that I have some real strong, emotional memories of needing privacy and not having it. And because I'm more private in how I share my feelings, and
Mhm.
I think that the children know, and my children tell me they'll be like, "Ma, this isn't something you can talk about," because
Right.
they don't tell me
Why
sometimes.
do
I
they
wish.
think? Why do
But I
they think
think it
that
is.
moms tell everybody everything? I don't
Well,
know. They
I
No,
have
have a
such
bad
strict.
reputation.
Yeah,
you
and it's
know,
completely different experiences, right? Because if we talk a thing about things with other moms, we're sharing moms share experience, and that's how we gain
Mhm.
broader perspective and insights into
right.
what our experience means. And we're sharing our experience of being moms the same way they're talking to each other about their experience about the boys or
Mhm.
girls that they like
Yeah.
at school,
Yeah.
or the
Right.
non-binary, the different people they like, and
Mhm.
the change of language that I'm always in trouble for. So
Mhm.
uh they their concerns are different than ours and different inside, and they can't understand that. They're not going to understand that, and we can't make them understand that. We can
Mhm.
start to say, well, I need to be able to talk to my friends about my experience that was so scary when this happened to you. Who's the one
Mhm.
friend that I can talk to about this that you won't feel that you can trust too? Like,
Mhm.
that's a different way of being able to say it.
Mhm.
My daughter said, "Just tell me, ask me before you talk to somebody." So
Mhm.
I
I
still ask
think
for
wow, that's a
permission.
good
Yeah, I
point.
like that. I like that because
Yeah, because
I was gonna ask you, and as we get to that point in the conversation, you can put a pin there, like the different narratives, because I think too, it's not only what we say, is how we say it. So I like that. So like, okay, so I need to be able to talk to somebody because I was so scared. Who is the one person you wouldn't mind if I spoke to? That's a whole different way
yeah, that
of
is.
approaching
Right?
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good.
That is
Right?
good. Yeah, it is good because I think a lot of times, if you're raised in a close knit family, you think that family's supposed to share everything with one another, right? But sometimes it doesn't always apply to that. And I think that's a good point to, and I feel like as a parent, I'm not a parent, but I feel like parents should have somebody to talk to when
Right.
they're
Like,
going
I
through.
need
I
someone that
think
I'm
they
able to
should. Yeah, I think
process
it's
my
only right.
experiences with, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
who that is really directly affects my child's experience, and there are
Yeah.
different ways to have that communication. Now, what you said, Gail, was it's not just how you say, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. And I would go that one step further, which is who you're being. So if you're being the parent as a status, I'm the control leader, I say this, I get to talk to whoever I want, you don't get to tell me who I can talk to, you're being one kind of person. If you're going to
Hmm.
be human and say, okay, I'm going to empathize, I'm going to be compassionate, you're a human who's experiencing this, but I'm also human too. How can we, that's a whole different
Mhm.
place to come from,
Yeah,
because you're
yeah.
really coming from a different way of being.
Mm-hmm.
And the trap we
And
fall
that's
into is,
be in the middle.
yeah, and the trap we fall into as parents is that we think we get to just say the
Mm-hmm.
answer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Last night my daughter calls and says after homecoming they're going to go to somebody's house after 11 o'clock. At first it wasn't clear, like it was before or after. It was after. We're not so keen on her going to that house of someone we don't know, with kids we don't know, after 11 o'clock.
Right.
But we just kind of like ask some questions first. And then, you know what? The other kids who she was going to go with, their parents said no. So it became, well, I don't want to do something that makes so and so's mom uncomfortable. It was a way
Right.
easier place for her to come from than for her to not want
Right.
to do
Yeah,
because we said no.
definitely.
She doesn't
Yeah,
want to be the one
yeah,
who's right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes just waiting a little bit and asking a question or two, things resolve themselves a bit more. And then
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, we have to think about, she really feels like going, where if we say no, what's that going to mean to her? And then how do
And then
we
what's
ask,
it gonna mean to you? What's gonna be
what's it
the
mean to us?
fallout?
And the next place would be, instead of just saying no, you can't stay out, would be, um, we feel if we feel uncomfortable. It feels unsafe to us for you to be late at night, like to be
Yeah,
honest about it,
definitely.
instead of just saying, no, we're the parents. This is what we think, and this is what you have to do. If to say that I think in terms of like examples and stories, I was working with a twice I've worked with fathers whose wives were enmeshed in really difficult conversations with boy teens in the house, and both had similarities in that the moms were attempting to kind of control what was going on, but they were also seeing it in reflections on themselves. So one was a
Hmm.
teacher who during COVID had a ninth grader who was staying in his room and wasn't doing great in high school, and I think she felt that this is her child. She should be able to help her child do well. As a teacher, a lot of times you have an idea that it's on the parents, that if only the parents did certain things. And so then when you're the parent in that situation, you put that pressure on yourself that you've been imagining
Hmm.
for, that you've been putting for imaginary parents. Um, but that, but as long as she was worried and putting that responsibility on him, and she was taking all that stress on, he wasn't ever going to show up. So what I helped the father to do was take the pressure off the mom by stepping in. It's okay. So she sees that he's taking a lead in it. She feels less like she has to be her role. And then what he was able to do was then shift the conversation to create more space for his son, and leave room where his son wanted to come out of the room because there was
Mm.
something going on and he wanted to join, create family activities, invite him out to go sit and chat and listen to him for a little while. And when the son no longer felt that it was coming out of his room and he was about to get a barrage of directions and criticism, and it's even if it's not what you're saying, it's often what you're embodying. If who you're being is someone
Mhm.
completely fearful for your child's future, your child feels that. What they want to feel is completely your sense of support and belief in them, and that you're going to help them reach for whatever they want to reach for. And
Mhm.
if they feel like they're disappointing you, and you're only going to keep reinforcing that message that somehow they're falling short, they're going to hide that much more. And it goes back to something else you said, Gail, where they don't tell you everything. Our children tell us things based on how we're going to react. If we react with criticism and judgment, they will not want to tell us things.
Yeah, that's true.
Mhm.
If we can
Mhm.
be open, non critical, and be listening and recognize our judgments and reactions
Yeah.
on them, and I realize that's a tall order, but that's what
Yeah.
I help people do. Um, we can come from a place, enter the conversation where they can receive it and where we can get both sets of needs met instead of reacting from all that emotional
Mhm.
place that
Yeah.
will
I'm
drive the
so sorry
Yeah.
I didn't meet you before, Leah. I'm so sorry. I would have saved myself a whole lot of grief, but because my son he's going to be 25 this week, and it's only in conversations we are having now that he's an adult. He would say, I hesitated to talk to you because you always came at me. It's very judgmental. You were listening, but you weren't
Mhm.
listening. And I would say, but I didn't even say anything. But it's your body
Your
language.
face.
It's your
Yeah.
body
Yeah,
language. It's your
yeah,
face. It's how you stand. I stand like this. They look on my face is like, are you serious? So it
right.
was all of
That's
these
right.
little things that I never even took into consideration. And like you said, that's how I was
It's what you're
conditioned growing up.
embodying. So if your
And
child's talking to
then,
you and you're like, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
yeah,
mm-hmm,
correct.
I'm
Yeah,
listening.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. It's true. Very
Right?
true,
That's really
Leah.
different than really. That
Yeah.
must
So
have been
tell me about
hard.
that. Like, how did you
Mhm.
Yeah.
feel and what
Right?
happened next? And it's really different. And it's good to have these conversations because I'm sure they're going to be really great for people who have the opportunity that I didn't have. It's too late for me, kind of. I can move forward, but I can't change the past.
Right.
I mean, I wish I could. I wish I could go back and have different types of conversations.
It's never too late to
But
It's
say
never.
no.
now I
Yeah.
If
get
you say
to
those
try to
things,
repair it, repair the
yeah.
damage,
Well,
and
if you say that
it's
to
like,
him and he feels he can say it now, that means they're already learning and growing from it.
Right.
And that is going to be huge. And I will tell you, my parents may not have been aces at handling the conversations with the children and the teens, but as I've grown into adulthood, they are aces in those kinds of conversations. And
hmm
they listen. And my dad hears a lot of the things that I do and pays attention, and it's not too late because
Yeah.
I can tell those stories, but and those stories my parents behave that way because of who they were, and I can tell you and decipher all of that, who they were and where they came from. and how they were doing the best they could.
Mhm.
But because they were open and receptive and ultimately love and an intention for connection, it was the primary driver of our connection and family. Those conversations have grown over time and changed, and
Mhm.
I'm I very much love and trust my parents and have great conversations with them, and they are supportive, and I think they've grown as people too. I don't think it's too late, and I don't think that it doesn't have to be as angst driven for us as parents of teens, but I'm not sure that not having those difficult conversations makes us less worried about our teens or less
Yeah.
Mhm.
concerned about who they
Mhm.
are. And the process of separating, the teens are already pushing us away in some ways. They're finding how they want to individuate, they're finding how they want to create autonomy, and they feel invincible in the world. And they are our hearts walking outside our bodies in a way that they
Yeah.
Mhm.
can't understand. And these
Can't
are completely
understand.
different
Yes.
experiences that are not easy to bridge until you become a parent
Mhm.
Yeah.
or
Mhm.
you
So,
work so
Leah, do you say when you become a parent, you understand what I'm saying? That, but they don't. They can't
Yeah.
relate. Or when you get your first job, you'll understand what I'm saying. But because they're not
no, I
there,
say that to
and that doesn't
myself
even
because
that doesn't even that doesn't make sense to
that's
even
right.
when you become a parent, you'll understand. And I have heard people say that. When my mother
People
said
say
X
that.
to me, I didn't understand what she was saying. But now that I have my son or my daughter, I really can understand why they're out late at night and you can't sleep, why something happens. And I know, like, when my son was small, he would have something happen at school and he would be crying and I would be crying too, because the bond was
Right.
that close. He's
They
sad,
are
I'm sad,
our hearts walking
outside
outside
of
our
our
body. When something
bodies.
happens to them, we feel it so intensely that we
Mhm.
We
react to it
do, we
happening to
do,
us.
we do.
And we don't, and yeah, but all the things, most of the things we say to our children are mostly the things we need to say to ourselves. And the things
Mm,
we wish they knew and understood, but they can't. So saying
hmm
you'll understand this when you're a parent is what we need to say to ourselves. When they're a parent, they'll understand. They can't understand me
Right.
right now, but one
Right.
day they'll have a different life experience. Because what we're basically saying is, no, you don't have the life experience to understand where I'm coming from.
hmm
And we have to say that to ourselves. Remember, they don't have the life experience to understand where we're coming from.
Yeah.
And
I think
Ah, so I love
that's a
that
good
point. So
one.
what you're really saying is that, I guess, the most important thing that we need to take away is your self-talk to yourself, is what you tell
Mhm.
yourself and your perspective that helps you get through those difficult conversations. And another thing that you said, and Karen, this keeps coming up in a lot of our conversations with our guests, the generational stuff. I
Mhm.
think your granny talking to you was so important and valuable. And if we can find a way to access those stories, talk to somebody who can explain, okay,
Yeah.
this is why your mom did this. Or your mom growing up, she behaved the exact same way and this is what I did, or your dad did this. And then you get to understand. I think the generational stuff is so important. I mean, this is a different kind of conversation. Before, it was from the perspective of, especially your medical examination.
Medical.
You have
Yeah.
no idea what your family went through, and you have this condition, and the doctor says, "Oh, so does your family have this?" And you're like, because you don't know. It's those conversations that
Right.
really, really help you to understand why you behave the way you behave, why you
Mhm.
are at this point, and then what you need to do differently to get, as I said, unlearn. Because you learn all these things growing
Mhm.
up, and then you have to unlearn certain things. But the way you behave makes so much sense, makes more sense now
Right.
because of a conversation you have with somebody who knew.
Yeah. Yeah. And that intergenerational perspective is huge. Pixar has done some, Disney has done some really good movies. So there's the movie Encanto, which I highly recommend to anyone who's interested in
Oh
intergenerational
yes, I saw that.
conflict, because you really get to see how that, and that's a real
Mhm.
trauma in a lot of families, especially immigrant families, have some
Yeah.
kind of trauma in their background. And when you have something like that, and you could see how much she took on the responsibility of having to
Yep.
do things for the family, right? And do
Mhm.
everything she thinks that she has to do that's well meaning is exactly the thing that's getting in the way.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
her granddaughter is able to call her on it, and she's able to eventually hear it. But
Yeah.
that's that's a really great example of something that happens in many ways in families. And the other one that I think embodies this really well was Red, where you have the on that, again, it's an immigrant family. The other ones weren't immigrants, they're in Colombia. They haven't immigrated, but they had trauma in their background, and this is an immigrant mom, and she's doing everything is for the protection of her child. Everything is out of love for her child. But those
Mhm.
same things that she's doing to love and protect her child are the same things that are in some ways getting in the way. And you can see, because the grandmother comes on the scene, how you really see how the mom was impacted and where the generational ways of talking to the
Yeah.
daughters, protecting the daughters, expectations of the daughter were at play. So I think that one's a Pixar and is really beautifully done in that
What's the
way.
name of that?
Red.
Encanto.
Red.
Oh,
Okay,
red.
Is it
Hmm.
Red Panda? Is it
no,
red?
I never
It used to be
seen
called
that one.
Red, but it has the panda
Yeah, I gotta see that one.
panda
I
in
never.
it.
I seen the first
It's
one.
if anyone who has Disney streams Disney, I love watching. Pixar's really good at
Yeah,
doing
they're good
good
at that. Because I
movies,
They
thought you were
have a
going to talk about
message.
major
Coco, because
human.
I found that movie Coco was very similar as well.
Yeah,
That was
yeah,
very, very
Coco.
Yeah,
good.
Coco is really good that way, but Luca
Hmm.
also has that theme with the parents trying to protect the child. But a
Yeah,
lot of Disney
yeah.
movies do. They put Sleeping Beauty gets put into a castle to try to protect her from what's coming. And we have old mythologies. Greek mythology has a story about the king who hears a prophecy about his daughter, and he tries to do everything to protect her. And
Mhm.
the very
Mhm.
things that he does to try to protect her, the very things that
Happen. Mhm.
enable the things to happen. And I think that's and you can see that in the Disney movies a lot. A lot of what the parents try to do to protect their child, Tangled, Moana, the
Mhm.
parents want to
Mhm.
protect. The child wants to go out and create, and because the child doesn't have a sense of mortality, and the child's not as afraid of their own self, what happens to them, the way parents are. What it would mean to you to lose your child is a whole different story than what it means when you're doing something for yourself. We don't carry the same worry for ourselves even that we carry for our children most of the time.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It is
The
true. It is
it's
true.
really
yeah, that's true.
a
In,
theme in a lot of those movies, and you can see happening. Less in Frozen because the parents are gone,
yeah, yeah.
right?
I seen that so many times because my niece loved it so much. So
But
I seen that so many. The
I
song
love,
and
yeah, I love watching all those movies because they really get a lot of the emotional underpinnings of why we're
Mhm.
behaving the way we do, and they
Mhm.
embody them like really well. There's
yeah,
this tremendous amount of emotional intelligence in those movies. So sometimes that's all I want to watch. I'm not
yeah.
in the mood for watching something dark and another killer of some sort.
No, but generational. I mean, generational families history. It doesn't. It plays in all aspects of life, right? Not just in a
Mhm.
medical sense and the history that comes with that, but also on the way we live and the way we think and things that we and our perspective of life and things like that. So I think that's a good thing, like Gail said, just to get an understanding. If you have someone who could tell you your family's background or history,
Yeah,
it's
understand
good.
where they came from.
Yeah.
See your parent as and for us as parents, if we could see our parents as
Mm-hmm.
the children they were
Children.
and the
Mhm.
vulnerable. So the story that makes me think of is that when I was about 11, I think it was, my grandparents were celebrating a milestone anniversary, and my aunt put together a play of all the grandchildren. There were 11 of us at the time, telling a story about when our parents, the children of my grandparents, were
Mm-hmm.
growing up and the house. And in their house were living two other grandparents. They put in the play that were living with them. So it was my grandparents and my grandmother's parents who lived in the house that my father grew up in.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the joke of the story was running in and saying that my dad did something again. My dad was the one always in trouble. And there were four of us acting out the parents and the grandparents, and then the kids running in and saying, "Mommy, Daddy, Grandma, and Grandpa, Lenny did this again." And my
Mm-hmm.
mom recently told me that she felt she was really against it because she didn't want us to know all these things that my father had done. And I think
Mm.
learning that my father had been that child who was in trouble all the time was so beneficial for me. Seeing him as a human, and my dad has
Right.
these very knit eyebrows. My daughter said that when she was young, she would think of just like when she was a baby, it was kind of like she thought of them as caterpillars. But he has these
Mhm.
really knit eyebrows. He's really big. He's really tall, and he could look at me like this, and could be really scary.
Right.
And to hear these stories about my dad that he'd been a child and that he'd gotten in trouble all the time, and then that part of me that sees that adults are not always fair towards children, and children are
Mm-hmm.
getting
Correct.
aren't always
That you did
fault.
this. You did
It's
this.
like it's like, oh, that's who my dad is on the inside. Like that's
Right.
Right, so it's really, really a great thing, I think, for me to experience. But it was interesting. My
Hmm.
mom's response was, "We have to not show our kids that we've done
Yeah,
things wrong, or
or
that we
that
don't
we're
want them to be
Yeah.
like
vulnerable.
us, right? We don't want
Yeah.
our children to be like." And I think that that's also, the different ways that we fall into as children. It's really helpful for us to understand our parents. It's really helpful to understand their life experiences because they're the voice in our head. The way to talk to ourselves usually comes from the way our parents and our teachers and the other adults in our lives talk to us. That time you
Hmm.
criticize yourself, you learn to criticize yourself from someone else.
Yeah.
That voice in
Hmm.
your head, right? So when you start to be able to shift how you understand where those voices came from and who they really are, you can have a different conversation in your head around them.
Yeah. That's good. And I mean, from what I'm hearing is that uh, when it comes to being a parent, I think it's important to be vulnerable with your kids, right? And a lot of parents have a hard time being vulnerable. Like you just said, just to be able to admit they're wrong in something.
Right.
That's another level of vulnerability as well. And just allowing your child to see or understand somewhat of where how you was born or where you was born or how you was raised and how you grew up as or what kind of kid were you as a child.
Right.
And we don't a lot of us don't know what kind of child parents was as a child. It's
Hmm.
kind of it comes in a
Wow,
full
that's like
circle.
I hadn't even thought about that. I'm like, I know who kind of kid. Like I also
Yeah, like a lot
I
of us
ask
don't.
questions. I have this tremendous gift of an intergenerational family that spends summers together. So I know who my grandmother was. I talk to all her cousins. I get the stories about their childhood. I know who
That's
my dad was.
good.
I know how his cousins saw him. I know how a lot of times they saw each other. I know I grew up with my cousins and listen and sitting on porches and having long stories with aunts and uncles and cousins. But a lot of my perspective and ability to have perspective intergenerationally comes from that amazing gift that's in my family. And I
That's
agree with you.
that's
I'd say
great.
go talk to your relatives.
Yeah, I
Same.
think that's
Come sit
good.
and have coffee and ask you some questions.
Yeah, that's definitely part. I mean, like I knew my grandmother. I knew who she was. She's passed on now, but it's still. I mean, I still have a few people that I could probably ask to get more information. But I think it's good to know your parents and as an adult now, right? I'm an adult now, so it gives me just to get an idea of how she was as a child and maybe how her being as a child might play into how she was as an adult
Yeah.
as
Mhm.
well.
Hmm. I
You
agree.
know.
And you can also ask her because they so what's one of the best memories you have from your childhood and
Mm.
what's
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good
Yeah.
one.
That's
If
a
you,
good one. Yeah.
yeah, like for
Or
listen,
maybe like what's the best ones and what are the worst ones, because sometimes we
Mhm.
so like sharing a bad memory could show me, okay, this is what they did to overcome it, or they weren't perfect, or
Mhm.
they stayed out late and this is what happened, because then you get to understand, that's probably why they're behaving when I am late,
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
you know
yeah. So
I like
anybody
the
And you
out
best
can
there,
ask
memories too.
them, but you can also ask them, "So, when you said this to me as a child, what were you really thinking?" Get in to find
Hmm.
out what they're
Hmm.
thinking as parents. What were
Yeah.
you most
Yeah.
afraid of for me as a child? So
you
my
Hmm.
know what's
parents my dad
Yes.
especially was really
that's a
clear,
good one.
but what he was doing, why he was doing it, and that was a gift.
Hmm.
And being clear about it, and we're doing the best we can, and we don't follow other people's advice. We're doing it for ourselves. We're doing the best we can. And we love you. Was a message that I got all the way through. And that
Hmm.
does help. It definitely helps because you look back and you go, yeah, they were always doing the best they could with what they could
Yeah,
and what they knew. And parenting in the 70s, was different,
yeah,
right?
right,
Just different ideas about how to parent. My parents were still on the stricter side even then, but
right.
um, there were things they were protecting themselves from. So like when they couldn't handle certain levels of emotion and they deflect or dismiss emotion, it's because they're super sensitive because they didn't
Yeah,
have the mind breath, like the mind space to take it in. Like
right.
so, asking those questions: what was most stressful for you being a parent? What did you love the most? What were the easiest moments? And then about their childhood, you'll get so much insight.
Yeah, and I think it will help you as a parent too. If you're a parent of a child, it will also in a sense, yeah, you're learning about your parent, but then it will also help you understand your maybe look into how you parent your children and how you could
Hmm.
pivot and make some changes. So
Absolutely.
I think that's
Yeah.
very
Mhm.
I never really thought about that, but I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
If you can
Really
Just
good.
the
humanize your
background.
parents, if you can humanize your parents, it will help you
Yes.
give yourself that permission to be human in your
Yes,
relationships too.
Yeah.
yes.
right?
That's a good
You
one.
describe vulnerability, and vulnerability is a very used word right now. So sometimes I'm
Mm-hmm.
careful around it. So what is the thing that makes us feel vulnerable? It's that
Right.
we feel there's some kind of guilt or shame, something emotionally exposing. We're not good enough. Those are the things we're trying to protect.
Yeah.
But it's when we can share those. Now, you don't want your child to see you weak. So weak is when you believe those things.
Right.
Mhm.
Vulnerable is when you accept that you're feeling it, but
Right.
you're willing to step into it and
Mhm.
Yeah.
own it and say, "This is really scary for me." And if I go, "Oh, but
Mhm.
this is scary," and you have to do the thing I do, da, 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 I look out of control. I'm allowing that fear to drive how I'm doing things, and then I am weak. But if I
Mhm.
say, "Holy shit, this is the scariest thing, you're about to drive a car, and all
Mhm.
these things are new in my mind now about what this means," and so that's where it, we'll, as parents, usually just start giving directions. But if we go,
Yeah.
I should understand that in this moment, when you go behind that wheel for the first time, my heart is behind that wheel with you. And until you have a track record of driving safely, there's a part of my body that's going to be hurting or
Oh yeah.
that
Yeah.
experience, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
don't know how to say that, but you see how that comes across more strong than when we just go, now be sure you do this and now don't do that. No, no, you can't drive at that time. No, you have to
Right.
ask me. Right. That they're gonna
Yeah.
go over there.
Well, don't put the
Yeah.
music on
But
while you're driving.
yeah, what about the other part of that, Leah? Because there's always the end part that we tend to forget. We might say, until you have a track record of driving better than X or Y. But I'm saying this because when you don't listen to me and you get into an accident, then all of that grief is at me. I have to deal with the insurance and I have to deal with the accident. Da, da, da. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
what
yeah.
you need.
That's
That
you
is what you
projecting.
need to do. That's what
Yeah,
you need to do what I say because when
yeah.
anything happens, I'm the person that has to clean up your mess, and I'm not about clean up. Leah, I have so many conversations I could share with
Yeah, but there, and so the kind of parent who likes to be in control of things, that's the
you.
kind of conversation that will come from. So I think that that's
Mhm.
trying to be in control of things. It's a whole projection into the future of all the things that could go wrong. But there's
Mhm.
no reason why not to just give the projection of all the things that could go right.
Right.
But
Mhm.
my
Right.
daughter just got her driver's permit, and I could share the fears that come up with her, but I don't think she cares. I mean, I don't think she would want to hear it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And that she
Yeah.
doesn't care, but why would I put that on her? Like, that's
Mhm.
mine to manage.
Right.
That's me to talk about with my husband or my friend. That's the place where I'm gonna pull in the support. But also I'm gonna know, yeah, this is scary. And you know what? I can't control what happens. I don't get to control what happens.
Yeah.
Trying to tell your child, if you do this, this is, and I care about it because I'm the one who's gonna have it. And I occasionally that happens. Like, I say things because I'm thinking a few steps ahead of what might go wrong. It never goes well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You
Because
drive
I'm
yourself.
trying to
And it is
control
a
an outcome.
projection. You're correct. It is a
It is.
projection.
Mhm.
And I
It's
think
not really
too,
their responsibility.
when you grow up and you have negative projections, and I know this is not English, when you have negative projections projected onto you, I think when you have your own children, like you don't ever think they could pass their driver's test and they could be the most awesome driver. We
Well, that's kinda how I like to think about it, and I
You
have
know, the negative is, oh, you could get into an accident if you don't listen to what I say,
right,
and then it's like there's always the other side, and the other side could be nothing could happen.
I have no
Nothing.
doubt my daughter's gonna be a better driver than I am. Absolutely. That doesn't mean I don't feel some of the fear, but I just switch it around. If I could
Yes,
imagine the things that can go wrong and or start thinking statistics,
you can
I can
imagine the
imagine
things that
all the
go
things that go
right.
right. How
Yeah.
many
Right.
more people do I know who have survived teenage
Yes.
driving? How
Yeah.
many more people do I know who've turned out to be extra careful drivers because of that one accident that they had when they
Mhm.
were a teen? I had
Mhm.
accidents as a teen. My husband had accidents as a teen.
Yes.
Sometimes our
Me
fears are
too.
because we're afraid they're going to have what we had and we don't want them to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
That
Correct.
fear, when we come from that fear in our communication, that's when it doesn't go well. And that my
Mhm.
daughter will be the first to tell you that it's not like I ace this all the time. She's like, Mom, you talk about how to have conversations with your kids, but that doesn't mean you always do it right. Because we're human. And the other part of that is then recognizing that they're not going to be the ones who can say, oh, you're right, Mom, I need to be careful. They're
Right.
never going to give us that. We are the ones who are going to need to give
Give
ourselves the
ourselves that.
empathy we need,
Yeah.
the vulnerability we feel of having our children be out there in the world doing dangerous and in a place
Yeah.
that we perceive. And the more we think of the world as a dangerous place, the more scared we're going to be, the more we want to intervene. And if we can feel like the world is a safe place and create that for ourselves. We help teach our children that it's a safe place, and it becomes a safer place for them. But they want to know from us that we believe in them, that we believe they have the tools to succeed, that we're going to support them if something goes wrong. So if they do have an accident, that's not the time to say, "I told you so.
Told you
I
so.
told you to do it." Right? It's like they're mortified. They're already
Yeah, they
hurt. This is the
scared.
time to say, this, right? How, okay, this time to be supportive. My in laws were amazing at this. My husband, just before I met him, as a 19-year-old, had a terrible accident. And I don't think he ever got reprimanded. They replaced the car. They handled the lawsuit that came from the passenger.
Mm,
I mostly know about it secondhand, but um, and that kind of support just stays with you. That
yeah.
no blaming and shaming, they're just there for you. That speaks so much more than anything you say, because anytime you say and speak from blame, shame, or fear, that is yours. That's not your
Hmm.
child's. That's
Yeah.
yours. And that's the hard part. I mean, we can
Yeah.
look at our kids as an opportunity to learn where those fears live for us, and to what we need to be nurtured, what we
Yeah.
need for ourselves, because it's about us. And most leadership is. Anytime you lose your shit, it's on you.
It's on you.
Nobody else is responsible for your
Yeah.
emotions.
Yeah.
Only
Yeah,
you.
that's a fact.
Yep. And nobody's coming to save you from it either.
Yeah.
You have to
No.
save yourself.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean your emotions are invalid. They're all trying to tell you something. They're all they're there for a reason, but they're not the
Hmm.
other person's responsibility.
No, that's true. That's
Yeah.
true. So let me ask you. So if a parent has a teen or young adult that, I don't know if you covered this, but they are they don't dialogue with their parent. Their parent asks questions. Oh, it's so good. Everything is good. Everything is fine, right? So, as a parent, what would be the best thing to do? Is it something that you should be digging deeper as a parent, or do you think it's more like what? How should a parent? Should be therapy involved? What can a parent do when they have those kind of? Because it's reality. Sometimes kids doesn't always feel comfortable talking to their parent, right?
Yeah.
So,
I
what can
think the
they
first
do
is
as a
to
parent?
start to ask, what kind of space are you creating for listening? If your child were to tell you what was going on, how would you be reacting?
Hmm.
Hmm.
And is that
Do
going
you
to feel
really
safe?
want to know? Do you really want to
Right?
know?
If you really want to know what's going on for your child, you stop and you just become present and you start creating space and you listen. If you're doing any of this, they're going to
Hmm.
avoid it. Once you just do this, eventually they will come land, because they want someone to talk to and they want someone to confide in.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't feel safe, then you ask them, "What can I do to support you?" You start to ask questions. You show up the way you'd want someone to show up for you. Okay, well, you know, you don't want to tell me about it. That's okay. But how can I support you?
I think that's a
I'm
good.
here. I'm rooting for you. I believe in you. The message that they need to hear is empowering, and that you're there to support them. And if you're consistent and open and accessible and not judging and offering unconditional love and support, they will eventually come and land, because it's really safe.
Hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless it's something really wrong, then you start to engage other adults that are going on in their life and say, go to the kids' school, go to the kids' counselor on concern.
Yeah,
But
that's a
needs to
good,
be
Leah, because yeah, that's very good because it was also going to lead to my, which is the same thing, like tips that parents could take to start acing those conversations with their teen or young adult. And I think you just pretty much explain how you should start that journey, right? And I think a lot of it is for a lot of kids, they don't know how the parent is going to react, right? And sometimes, like you just mentioned, our facial and our body language, our nonverbal communications speaks for us.
way more than we realize.
Yeah,
And
Yes.
some of us are better at math, are better poker players than others.
yeah,
But I'd say that's another thing. And you just invite your child to do something with you that does not make them have to talk. Go on a car trip, play a game, go out for dinner, play cards, want to watch a movie. Invite them, show them that you care, you value their presence, you care what they have to say. You can be quiet together. And if
Hmm.
you can be comfortable with yourself and the discomfort of whatever you're concerned about, they will become more comfortable talking to you about it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times
yeah,
when they don't tell you things, they're protecting you. They don't want you to know about things that are going to make you upset. They're doing what
Hmm.
they've learned will create a safe environment for them and also for you. They don't want your reaction to it. They don't want, you
Hmm.
know,
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good
I,
one
I
because
agree with that 300%. It's
yeah,
true.
Yeah, because I know when I was younger, and the reason why I didn't tell my mother something is because I was like, oh, she's gonna be mad, and other things that you play into your head as a teen, and oh, I'm gonna protect my mom, and I don't want to let her, I don't want her to upset her,
Mhm.
so, and I think that's part of it too. The kids coming from a place of they don't want to disappoint you, right? So they don't
And they
want to
don't wanna
let
be
you know.
responsible for
Yeah,
handling your emotional reaction. They've got enough going on that
yeah,
your emotional reaction is just too much. I can't, I'm not
Yes, they
gonna deal
can't
with that,
handle it.
right? I don't
yeah,
want
Yeah.
that. I
yeah,
have
yeah,
space for that. We still don't always tell people everything because we don't want to deal with their emotional
yeah,
reactions to everything.
yeah.
That's often they're protecting. So there's usually some kind of dynamic like that going on, or they think you're going to try and fix them. You're going to get involved.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that movie Red is really good, where the mom gets over involved and embarrasses the daughter and has no idea that she's the one creating all the problems
Yeah.
Yeah.
for the child. But it's the same. Why do we not tell somebody something? Because we don't want to deal with their reaction.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Hmm.
That's true. Yeah. So before we're gonna pivot a little bit, I know that you have a master class coming up on the 26th.
Yeah, I have my acing difficult conversations on Wednesday, and I can talk about teens, but I also talk about other kinds of conversations. The principles are
Mm-hmm.
the same. And
Okay.
like I think Gail came and you made the connection to
Yeah.
teens, and people come and they make those connections, and at some point I can also start to make more specific ones like that. The link, if anyone is on LinkedIn, goes to my profile, they
I
will
know.
find the
I
link
have
to
it.
the
I'm gonna put it.
masterclass right there. And I think I also sent you the oh yeah, that's the subscribe through the mailer light, and there's also a LinkedIn event you can register through. So, but the subscribe is the easiest because then you'll get the emails to remind you of things where,
Yeah.
and you get the ad event to put it on your calendar. I go through the same basic principles each time, but the presentation is never the same because people's experiences and questions. And I
Okay.
ask people what they want to get from it. I really want it to be valuable. So I do ask people the scenarios they want to hear addressed. And so those change every time.
Okay,
Hmm.
that's good to know. I think for anybody, I mean, having a difficult conversation, I think is hard. At least when I speak for myself, right? I find it could be challenging because you play so many things in your head: how the person's going to take it, what is going to happen, how they're going to view you after you said or whatever is you're saying. So you play so many things in your head, so the conversation naturally becomes difficult, and then you don't know what the reaction is going to be of the other person that you're going to give.
Well, that's a lot of what makes it difficult is that the way you prepare for it is you
Yeah,
start running through all the possible scenarios of the things that could go
right.
wrong and the things that they could say. And what
Yeah.
I hope to do is give people different things to do in their heads to prepare. And if you go with the intention to connect and be curious, and the hard thing is not knowing how the conversation is going to go. But if you can
Yes.
trust yourself to be present,
Yes.
to connect, and to be curious, then you will have a lot more maneuverability
Yeah.
and actually be able to help the conversation get back on track faster than if you go in with all these prepared things you're going to say and ways you're going to defend yourself and show that you're right and prepared for whatever they might say back. And
Right.
you know you're going to be ready because then you've
Yeah, I
already
had
had
to
the
learn
conversation
that.
in your head. You
Yeah.
go in with that conversation, very likely is the one that's going to happen.
Yeah, I had to learn. Yeah, I agree. I had to kind of unlearn. I'm still learning the process, but I had to kind of pivot my mindset because then we'll go to that process, right? I already have a remark based on what's and nothing been said yet. So I don't know what to. So I had to kind of learn to put it on a positive
It
spin,
is
right?
true
So
Uh-huh.
for
because
So
you
the more
always
me,
you
want to be
can go
ready.
in, that the more you can go in with connection and listen first and make the other person feel safe and then ask clarifying questions, you'll find you're actually in a different conversation than the one you
yeah,
thought you were going to enter.
Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
definitely,
Yeah, I
definitely.
think the listening is really more important. I think I'd rather listen more intently than even respond. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm just listening. I know my son has a thing with his friends where somebody says, I need to talk. And his response is, okay, you need to talk. What is my role? Am I just listening to you and not saying anything? Am I giving you advice? Am I putting you in touch with somebody who can help you? Which of these three things? And you tell me what you expect my role to be as a
Mm-hmm.
support mechanism for you before you even talk so that I will know how I am supposed to listen. And I was very impressed with that, because he's so much younger than me. I never even thought of that. Because
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
always
that's
ready to
great.
go in with guns blazing. But as I said, Leah, I am
Uh-huh.
so sorry that I didn't. And I'm a Caribbean parent. I think that's how we are. We are very on fire for our kids, and I think it has
Yeah.
a lot, as I said, to do before with how we ourselves were raised. But I'm so sorry I didn't meet you before, because certain parts of my life would have been a lot less
And what you say
exciting.
makes me want to I also want to say that it is important that we look at the cultural context.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
20 plus years ago, I was living in Cairo and I was friends with an Egyptian woman there who was in a really different class, because as soon as you're American and show up in Cairo as an expat, you're living a whole different life than the typical Egyptian. And she was more like this with her children, right? But that's so much the culture she came from, and also that's how authorities are more typically going to behave there.
Mhm.
And authority, there is a command and control, and this is also a post-colonial system, and those things are not irrelevant. So I could help her on how to show her moves to be more present, empathetic for her children, but I also have to be careful that I don't know what the system there is and what those children
Mhm.
also
Mhm.
need to be prepared for in terms of who else
Mhm.
to deal with.
Yeah.
So, um, and I think generally emotional intelligence is always going to be a benefit, and I think anyone who can um, show somebody when they're doing something wrong how to do it better with kindness and
Mhm.
strength is going to be better off than the person who could speak the loudest. But there
Yeah.
was a time on the bus where somebody who just came on making a huge fuss was super loud and got what they wanted, because that's how things could be there
Culture.
sometimes. At
Mhm.
least back then when I was there. So I think that and I say that because you're saying being a Caribbean parent, and that one has to also be aware of one's cultural surroundings, and that if you're going to do something a little bit countercultural, a little bit different, that you're also have a way to have build a conversation around that, and to create skills, communication skills for our children with
Yeah.
dealing with the what's around them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly
Great.
still have plenty of that to do here within the school. So my daughters both learned how to advocate for themselves with their teachers, how to speak up, write emails, write letters, ask things of their teachers, and how to communicate with kindness, but also to speak up for themselves. And the teachers actually are really receptive to it, way more than we would often think, because they like having students who actually care about
Mhm.
their learning,
Mhm. Mhm.
want to be communicative and in touch with them, and they're pretty responsive most of the time. I think they have some pretty good teachers who actually really care about their students, and that's good. But they also learn how to speak up, and I think that that's part of it. So if you were going to have done it differently, we do things in the context of what's happening around us. If we're going to do it different,
Mhm.
we do have to be mindful of those other contextual, cultural communication cues that are around us, and help make sure our kids still have the skills for those.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. Today, I really enjoyed today's conversation. Even though, like I said, I'm not a parent, but I have teen nephews, right? And I think it's important for me to just learn how to get this conversation going with them, right? Because I mean, they have great parents themselves, but as an extension of that, I always want to make them feel like you can always talk to me if you feel like you need to have that
It's a
conversation with me.
special place to be the aunt,
Yeah.
because you aren't the parent. So if you take them
Right.
out and just go do things with them, they'll open up
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah.
They'll
Yeah.
feel like they
I
can
learned
trust you.
that.
You can be this other. Having aunts and uncles and close friends who are like aunts and uncles were really tremendous for me to be able to process and talk
Yeah.
through my own relationship with my parents, because I didn't feel like I was bad mouthing my parents. I was talking about them to people who knew them and understood them and loved them the way I did,
Right.
who weren't going to go, "Oh yeah, I can't believe they did that," but who were going to be like, help me think about it and how I wanted to show up, or how I wanted to bridge
Right.
it, or help understand them as people.
Yeah.
It's a gift. My sister does that with my kids, and it's beautiful. I don't know if they talk about their parents, but there's someone they can really trust and they know is there for them through
Mhm.
it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's huge.
And you know that she would be there for you too. So
Right.
that's good. That's a win-win.
Yeah, it is. So we're
Yeah.
about to close, guys. But in closing, Leah, I want you any last words for anybody to take home,
Yeah.
and
I think I just
and
want people to know that I'm reachable in the messages, that you don't have to be thinking about whether you would hire me or not hire me, work with me, not work with me to attend my asymmetrical conversations, or to once in a while ask a question related to a conversation coming up. Because if you ask the question, it helps me know what people are concerned about. And even if
Mm-hmm.
I don't answer a whole lot directly in the DM, what I do my live sometimes answering those questions. I do
Mm.
create content sometimes answering those questions. So I just recommend feeling free to reach out, that I will always answer, and then I can go deeper in content. It just helps me know what's valuable. Um, Even if it's not something somebody feels like, well, I don't want to ask a question because maybe it's going to take her time, or I don't know if she's going to make me want to hire her, or whatever kinds of things people have going through their
Yes.
minds.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I really
Yeah.
want to help people have better conversations, because better conversations and stronger relationships and better connections are really how we're going to change this world. More empathy,
Yeah.
Agreed.
caring for each other, knowing
Agreed.
how to be more clear and how to listen to points of view we don't like.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
starts with the families.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's
And
true. It
these
do start with the family, and then you be able to do that with other people as well.
and these
I
master
mean,
classes are the bomb.
well, I'm gonna be
They
going to
are
your
the
master
bomb,
class,
Oh,
hands
me
Leah.
down.
I'll
too.
be there because I'm definitely, I'm very into learning how to now just, conversational wise, and how to be a greater listener than a talker. So I think
Yeah.
that's
And
for
you're also
me.
from the New York area, right? Like we talk, we
Yes,
laugh, we
yes. You know
interrupt,
how New York.
we
You
listen
know
by
how.
talking. We listen by talking and
That's
saying
how we
something back. I
are.
got you. I hear what you're
Yeah,
saying.
right.
It's an overlap.
You know how we, yeah, you know how New Yorkers, and not only that, the way maybe I come across, it might come very aggressive or abrasive, but I'm not trying to do that. It's just
No,
that
no.
Yeah.
it's
I
in,
never knew how aggressive I was till I left New York and saw how people responded to just the fact that I say what I mean. In
right,
California, they hint.
right.
And there was an episode where something happened with one of my daughter's school, and I had a conversation, and then she's like, well, then what was that conversation about? It was about exactly what I said it was about. If I wanted something else in the conversation, I would have asked for it. I'm from New York. That's
Yeah,
what else do you do?
yeah.
No, I really understood that something different when I was it was dress rehearsal for a Shakespeare opening in the park, and there was a pre-show that helped people get into hearing the Shakespeare language. And I went out to watch it in costume, and the stage manager said to me, well, when we're live, we won't be able to sit out here. And I was like, yeah, I know. And I stayed there watching, and then I go, wait a minute, are you trying to ask me to go back
I was about to
backstage?
say.
I didn't get it. I was like, I'm like, yeah, I do know that. Like, I actually took it at face value, and I sat there, and I feel like, oh yeah, I got it. I get Californian now. When I was able to infer the hint that
Yeah,
Mhm.
I wouldn't have otherwise been able to infer. And that is one of the things happening in difficult conversations sometimes. Don't actually know how to ask for what we really want. We talk around it, and we expect people
yeah.
to then know how to do it. And I say
That's
that's
true.
like going to Starbucks window and asking for what you don't want.
Yeah, that's
We're
true.
much better at doing that in life than we are of actually asking for what we want.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I hope listen. I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation today because for me, I loved it. Gail loved it too because we both smiling.
Yes, it was
Leah,
very
Oh,
thank you,
valuable.
thank
thank
I
you.
you.
learned
Thank
a
you for
lot.
having me.
Yeah,
Thank
You're
thank
very
you.
you.
welcome. And before we go,
Okay,
I'd
well,
just
thank
like
you.
everybody else to on the chat to just make sure they sign up for Leah's
Yeah,
masterclass. As I said,
please.
she's very
Thank
good. I
you.
found the conversation today very valuable, and I'm
Yeah, me
sure
too.
her masterclass is going to be just as valuable. So thank you very much, Leah. It was a pleasure having you,
Thank
and
you.
I'm sure
My
one day we'll
pleasure.
have you back.
Yes, don't let go of yet, Leah. But I'm
Thanks.
just gonna
Okay,
close
I'm
out.
good.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks for coming.